Welcome once again, everyone, to our payroll webinar today. As we go through these topics, you'll see we're going to start with basically configuration in Procare. And because I am a little behind, I'm going to probably go through some of these things a little quickly. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand or type a question in the chat box as we go. Otherwise, try to hold questions maybe for the end after I stop the recording, and we can take as much time as we need then. So we're going to look at basic things in Procare, like your configuration and tax table setups. Configuration is like your payroll year, what bank account you're issuing checks out of, that kind of thing. Then we're going to set up an employee and show you how to add the withholding assignments for the employee. Then we'll issue paychecks, and we'll discuss briefly our direct deposit add-on that you can use. Also, we'll discuss looking at how you issue an advance check to an employee, either a standalone check or as part of a payroll check. And if you need to void a check, how you would do that. Then lastly, we'll look at the payroll tax reports and some common issues you may run into in our payroll. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to my Procare, and we'll get started with that. And right away, we're going to, let me get another piece up here. There we go. So we're going to start right here with configuration and system. You may or may not have already done these steps in Procare, but we're going to start with the regions and schools right here. And I'll just open that up. Notice that it's got a shield icon next to it. That means that you need to be logged into Procare as a system supervisor in order to perform these functions. And it's going to be imperative that you are able to set this up to start with. If these things are not set, then payroll would not work. So we're going to start with regions and schools. I'm going to stay on the region level to start with. Go to Set Options at the bottom. And the very, very first thing we're going to look at is under Payroll here. We're going to look at our federal unemployment. Now, depending on how your center is funded, you may or may not be responsible to pay federal unemployment taxes for your employees. If you are responsible to do that, you would want to come in here and set up the FUTA, or Federal Unemployment Tax Authority, options for your center. This is individually determined business by business, so your rates may or may not be what we see on the screen here. You would want to set the year, and the different rates are available. Usually the employer for federal is the only person paying, but you may have a situation in your state where employees pay part of this as well. We have two tables, and you want to maintain the current year and the prior year when you're setting up these table rates. The reason is if you need to run a payroll report for the prior year, last year, for example, it will pull the rates from this table for last year. The same thing is true for our state unemployment, or SUTA, and those are not controlled in the region options. Those are controlled at the state level, and you can see that down here where it says state unemployment. It's grayed out. It tells you set those individually school by school. So we'll go ahead and exit there. I'm going to open up my region so I can see my schools here. Select the first one and go to Set Options, and again, select Payroll on the left. And now my state unemployment becomes available, and the region level for FUTA is no longer available. So again, you would set your rates for the prior year and for the current year if you are responsible to pay into state unemployment tax for your employees. So that's the main thing there. The other thing that you want to make sure you have is for your employee data module over here on the left. Let me back up out of here. I want to go back to the region level. You go to Set Options at the region and select Employee Data. This is where you'll set your pay period information. So if you're just getting going with both employee data and payroll together, make sure that you've got your pay period set correctly here. Whatever it might be. Ours is set to twice a month with our different start dates here, the 1st of the month and the 16th through the remainder of the month. If it's every 2 weeks, just make sure you have the start date right there. The start day of the pay week up here is important for payroll overtime calculation. So if you're maintaining times in the employee time card for their worked time, then you want to make sure this is set to the correct start day of the pay week. Overtime is calculated Monday, in this case, Monday through Sunday of the following weekend. Any time over 40 would be counted as overtime for regular work hours. Benefit hours are normally not subject to overtime, so you'll be setting those up as exempt from overtime, and I'll show you that. And this is your overtime calculation down at the bottom. We're not calculating overtime for any work hours over 8 in a day, but we are for over 40 worked hours in a particular week. So that's set to true. Okay. Another thing to set in the regions and schools in the general section is your tax ID, if you want that to appear on paper on different reports. And also in our payroll section, I want to make sure that the pay year is set correctly up here. If this is the incorrect year, not the current year, when you go to issue a check, it will not issue because it's not in the current payroll year. Also, you would define your payroll checking account. If you have a separate checking account, you may have 2 or 3 different checking accounts set up in Procare. Pick the right one there. Also assign the correct asset account for employee advances. Remember that an employee advance, the way we treat this in Procare is really it's like a short-term loan by the employer to the employee. So when you issue an advance on the next payroll check, Procare is going to want to pay all of that advance back to the employer as a deduction from the paycheck. Okay, so those are the main things in the regions and schools. Let's go down to our accounting management. And the first thing I'm just going to summarize again, we cover this a little bit more in the employee data module, the webinar that we cover these things in. Pay codes and benefit codes. All pay codes must be entered in the pay codes table first, and then some of these codes may be defined as benefits. So for an example, I've got a vacation pay code here, which is a benefit, and I've exempted it from overtime in the overtime column by unchecking the box here. If I had something that were a benefit that were taxable, then not taxable, but subject to overtime, I'd go ahead and check that box, but I don't. All of these you'll see, vacation, training, bonus, holiday, and those things are going to be subdefined in the benefit codes table. So only some of our pay codes would be added into the benefit codes table. I double click that to open it. So there's our benefit codes. What's different about this table is that you can choose whether you want to show balances on the paycheck stub. And normally I don't really need balances here for anything except maybe vacation and sick time. Everything else here, I don't need that to print on the paycheck stub, so I'm not going to have that print. Also, I can control the percentage of how much is going to be paid of the straight time rate assigned to the employee by this percentage column. So, for example, if my straight time rate as an employee is $12 an hour and I have vacation hours in my time card, and I have this set at 100%, it means that I'm going to get paid $12 an hour for vacation time. If I change this and said 50% or something like that, in my example, I'd only get $6 per hour for vacation. So this is something you can control. Normally, it's set to 100%, except for something usually like jury duty or some other benefit that may not pay out at the full straight time rate. Okay. You can get help on any of these setup files by just clicking the question mark in the upper right corner on that specific table, and that will take you to the help file there. So once you've got your pay codes set up, then the next thing to set up is under payroll, we've got these 3 elements: payroll formulas, general ledger assignments, and check printing. We only need check printing if you're going to have Procare print the checks through the system and send them to your printer with pre-printed checks that you've got loaded in the printer. I'm going to start with payroll formulas and double click that. Up in the upper left corner, we've got three categories here. We have federal, state, and general. Federal and state are tax tables that Procare supplies you. When you install Procare and you've got your payroll module, the very first time you start using it, you'll be able to download the current year payroll tax tables free. Thereafter, each year, when you get to the next payroll year, there is a small fee to get the new year tax table updates. And when you do that, you would want to do this button down here, download and update. So when I hit that, it's going to bring up a little box based on your installation key, which is specific to your child care center. We're going to get a little box where you put in your password to download the next set of tax tables. That password is given to you when you purchase that tax table. It'll show up in your news ticker on the left at the main screen of Procare, but you'll also see it right at the tail end of the ordering option when you order the tax tables. So that's just to let you know that. I've got the current year already loaded here for 2016. These are my federal related taxes, and then I've got state taxes based on each state. So if we go down to Oregon, here's my Oregon. I've got 2016 right there. And then the last category is general. Now, general is different. These are things that are specific to your school. You may or may not have these kinds of withholdings available. We've got an example set up here for employee child care, but I'm going to download another one just to show you how it works. And an example of that might be a healthcare plan. So if you withhold money from people's checks for a health insurance premium, you would want to download our regular formula for that, and that's under here, the General Formulas button. When I hit that button, it's going to take me to the Procare website. So I'm going to switch over to what that looks like. Here is the Procare website right there, and it puts me on this help file called Download General Withholding Formulas right there. There's a little video here on how this actually works, and it's basically what you're seeing on the screen right now. You've got a verbiage here that explains how to download, and then down below you've got a table where you can select different formulas. So the top section is the most common ones, and then down below that we do have some specific withholdings that are specific to states or even cities in the United States, depending on where you are. So you may have something here that's specific to you that you would want to download as well. I'm just going to download our health plan. So all I do is highlight the link over on the left, click it, and you'll see that it downloaded right here. That shows me that it downloaded to my download file in Procare, or on my machine rather. Now I'm going to switch back to Procare. That's all I have to do for the download part. When I get back to Procare, what I would do is import the formula that I just downloaded. So we'll click import, and I'm going to go to my downloads folder where I downloaded it, and there's the one I just downloaded. I've got the date and time right there. Select open, and it tells me that it's ready to be imported. Okay, and there it is. So this particular formula has just a very simple way of determining how much to withhold. I'm going to double click it. We use what we call a variable here, and it's defined down in this add variable button, but the name of the variable in this case is AMT, short for amount. What that lets us do is it lets us assign a different dollar amount employee by employee. If I charge the same amount for everybody, I could just use this as the flat dollar amount. If it were $100 for everybody, then I could just put the 100 right there and not even use a variable. But the variable lets me change that employee by employee. Also, if there's a default value that most people are paying for that variable, let's just set it at 100 here. If I save it as 100 in the variable definition of AMT, it's going to automatically bring that 100 in when I assign it to an employee. Okay, So that's just a brief overview. I'm not going to have enough time to go through how to create your own withholding formulas, but you can do that by highlighting a current formula and then creating a new one based on that. You can also mark whether an a withholding is exempt from certain taxes. So for example, if I had like an AFLAC or something like that, that might be exempt from federal and state income tax, I could go into the exemption button for that particular withholding, and it's up here. I've got employee child care selected, and then mark it and save those. I'm not going to do that for this particular one, but that's how you would do that. Okay. If you need help again with this or want more information about it, just click the question mark. That'll take you to the Procare support website and show you the step-by-step on how to create those formulas. Also, there's a couple of videos recommended there too to show you this. I just wanted to go through making sure you have your federal, state, and any local or general formulas set up. And once you have those, you want to go through and assign general ledger assignments. These are determined in this chart of accounts section. So I'll just show you quickly. We've got down here, for example, in our expense categories, we've got all of our expenses for payroll. These are our employer expense parts, but we also have liabilities for payroll set up. This is the amounts that we're taking out of people's checks on their behalf that we're going to send in, say, to the federal government for Social Security and Medicare, any local tax or state taxes. Any of these things are going to be in a liability account. Again, if you need more help with chart of accounts, click the question mark up there, and you may want to review your chart of accounts with your accountant to make sure it's set up right. So when you assign these, you've got your payroll expenses and your payroll liabilities falling into their correct accounting buckets. Let's just go in here. All of our federal liability is already assigned. Let's look at the state. And I've got my state unemployment assigned as a state tax liability. And I've also got Oregon set up as a state tax liability. You just pick your state here and assign the correct general ledger account to that. Oop. And then the last one to check there would be the general. And since I downloaded a new one here, the health plan, I have a blank general ledger account for this. So I want to pick my liability. This is the account that is going to hold the dollars that I owe to our health plan. You know, Regents, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, whoever it might be. That's who the check is going to get written to when I write the check for the premiums that I'm withholding from my employees. Just like that. And then lastly, check printing setup. This only applies if you're going to use Procare to send the check to the printer and have your printer loaded up with pre-printed checks with your logo and your routing number and bank account number and so forth pre-printed on the check. All of these elements can be moved around by just clicking and dragging them. If you want to add an element, you can select it up here to add. If you want to take one off, maybe you don't need the pay period, you just highlight it and click delete, and that'll remove it. When you have things lined up the way you think they should be, just click the print sample, and that will send it to your printer, send it to plain paper, and then try to line it up with your check the best that it lines up. You've got two different formats up here, one with the check located in the middle of the paper, one with the check at the top third of the paper. So it would be one of those two. Okay, and that's really all of the setup work that we've got. Any questions there before I proceed to adding an employee and setting up withholdings? Charles, looks like your hand is up. I'm going to go ahead and put it down. If you had a question, go ahead and raise your hand again or type it into the chat box there, and I'll look for it. Okay, so we're going to go over to employee data. When you set up an employee for the very first time, I'm going to use an existing person in Procare just to save us some time. So I have a dad over here, Greg Adams, on the family side. He's been bringing his kids to us for a couple of years. He's going to go to work for us as a part-time bus driver. So I'm going to add him as an employee. And the very first thing I want to do is add him as an employee up here, and I've got my little drop-down box to choose whether I'm adding him as a new person or existing. Because he's already in the database, I want to add him as an existing person. I don't want to duplicate any of his demographic information over and over and over. This is pretty important. So we're going to choose to find him by part of his last name there. I typed that into the last name box. Here's Greg right here. He's already highlighted. Just select him, and now he's been added as an employee. There's a few other things we need to set up for this employee in order for him to be able to be eligible to have a check issued to him, or for him to be able to use the check in and out system. For example, if you're recording times for employees by having them check themselves in and out of work, they need to have a work status of currently employed. So because he's brand new, he has no work status set up at all. So we're going to set that first. And I'm going to make him employed as of July 1. And currently employed is the employed status. So that'll allow him to use the check in and out system. There's a couple of other things I want to set though. One of those is his primary work area. This mostly relates to using the check in and out system, but when you set a new employee up, they have no primary work area assigned to them. That means that when they use the check in and out, all of these positions, or excuse me, these rooms or work areas are going to be available for them to pick, and it's going to be highlighted on the very first one, infants room. Well, he's a driver, so he is going to be working in the bus van area, because that's what his work area is. It happens to be the van. I'm going to assign that. When he goes to check in now, this work area is going to be automatically pre-selected on the check-in screen. The other thing I want to set is his pay rate. And the reason I want to set this is, again, same issue. At the check-in station, if I don't have anything set in here, which I don't necessarily need it issued, but you do want it if you're using payroll. You would want to have their straight time and overtime rates set up in here for sure. And then you want to have whatever position or positions that person may work for you assigned here. I'm going to say Greg works for us at $12 an hour straight time and $18 overtime. And this is what I want to pay out his benefits at. I want to pay any vacation or sick time at the straight time rate I've got designated here of $12 an hour. This benefit box relates to the benefit pay codes we looked at the beginning, where we had the 100% column. So anybody that's got a pay code set up with different percentage rates, that's going to affect how much is paid for that benefit based on this straight time rate right here. Okay, great. So now I've got the basics set up. I've set up in his information and relationships section the normal work area where he works. I've got him employed as of July 1, and I've got his pay rate set up here in the pay rate button. In order to issue him a paycheck, and if I want to develop that based on time recorded in his time card, I'm going to want some times put into his time card. So what I'm going to do here is just catch this up for him for last month. We're going to put in a pay code of driver and the bus van as his work area, and I'm going to go back to last month, and we're going to start with, well, let's start with the 4th here. And we'll say that he has a morning run from 8 o'clock until 10 o'clock, like that. I'm just going to hit the enter key, and then I'm going to copy this day so that I can move down one day. I want to change the day back here to the 4th because he's got a split schedule. He actually works he does a morning shift and then he does an afternoon shift. Like that, save that. Yeah. I did something wrong here. Oh, I see. I've got the wrong day there. not the 4th. There we go. Okay, so he's got 2 hours in the morning on the 4th, and then he's got 2 hours in the afternoon. Grand total of 4 hours for the day. I want to copy that out for the rest of the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's what this copy day button does for you. Once I've got a full day, or excuse me, a full week set up, I can copy the whole week for the rest of the month. So now I've got time in for him for all of last month. We're going to save that, and that's just a way to show you. You can enter times in pretty quickly. You can modify these if you need to, but I wanted to get time in here so when I issue the check, you'll see how Procare calculates it from the time card. Before I can issue him a check, though, I need to set up his withholdings, and the withholdings is here in this little federal building. When I go in there, there's nothing assigned to this employee because he's brand new. So I'll have this autofill button available. It's only available on the very first time you go into this screen on a new employee. If you start adding withholdings here without using the autofill, that autofill button will go away. But if you click it, it'll bring in the federal, 3 different federal taxes and your state income tax. From here, all I need to do is select which tax I'm working on by using a little arrow over here on the left of the line. I want my federal income tax. To get his W-4 information, which is the number of allowances he's claiming, whether he's filing as married or single, I just highlight that line and click Variables at the bottom. So he is a married individual. He's going to be filing as married. I'll set that to true. He's claiming no allowances, and he's claiming no extra withholding from his check for federal. So we'll save that. Social Security has nothing to set. There are no variables. So if I go in there, there's nothing to set there. But Medicare does have a filing status that you need to assign. So if he were a single head of household or qualified widow, that would be a 1. He happens to be married filing jointly, so he's a 2. We'll change that to 2 and save that. And the last one to set would be his state. Whatever your state form is for the withholding allowances and filing status, that would be set up here. So he doesn't have any withholdings allowances claimed for his state either. So we're going to change that to 0. And now we're done. If you did have another general withholding, for example, employee child care or maybe the health plan, we would now assign that as well. I'm going to assign him the health plan, and I'm going to do that by clicking New Withhold down at the bottom. Change my category up here to be general because that's one of our specific to our schools withholdings. General there, and then over in subclass, I've got the 2 that are defined as general in the system. I'm going to choose health plan and load. Now remember, when I was in the variable for this particular general withholding, I set the value in there for that variable to be 100 by default. So that's going to bring in 100, or if it's different for him, he may be just he and his wife, so the premium might be different. I can just highlight that and modify it for him. This allows me to set that dollar amount for each person, each individual employee separately in the system. That's why we use that variable in setting it up in the general withholding. So that's pretty much it. We're ready to issue him a check. Any issues or questions up to this point? Okay, I don't see any hands going up. If you do have a question, I know I'm going kind of quickly here because I started late, but if you do have a question, feel free to just type it into the question box there and we'll catch it. Great. So now Greg has his withholdings set up. He's currently employed. He has time in his time card. I'm now ready to issue him a paycheck. I'll just go over what these 4 buttons are here in the payroll setup. When you add the payroll module to Procare, you're going to get these 4 buttons appear, or these little icons appear. So this is where we issue a check by using the payroll check calculation. This is where we set the withholdings. If you had any recurring credits that occur every paycheck for an employee, you'd put them in the credit box. Same thing with reimbursements. If you have anything that predictably repeats for an employee as a reimbursement, some folks give folks a cell phone reimbursement allowance or a flat dollar amount, and they put that in every paycheck. So that might be something you'd want to add. If it's not something that recurs every check, I recommend you leave these empty because you can add them on the fly when you do an individual check. So let's look at Greg right here. And notice that because we're in the first pay period of August, the last pay period is the last half of July. So Procare is going to default to the last half of July as what we want to issue a paycheck for. Because that pay period is now over, we can look at the total time every employee worked and issue checks specifically for that pay period. You can change this if you need to issue a check further back, for example, the first half of July. You could change it right here by clicking a little 3-button icon right there and then selecting what pay period you want. As it is, we're going to use the last half of July. And we've got some buttons going across here that are basically executed left to right. The first button is the gross pay, so we want to calculate that. When I click the import button here, it's going to pull the time from Greg's time card and pre-populate it on this screen. So I clicked import. It went into his time card and looked at the last half of July, calculated that he had 40 straight time hours for that pay period at a rate of $12 an hour. His total gross down here is $480. Well, let's say that we didn't have that. I'm just going to exit this and then come back in. Let's say we didn't have the time in the time card. You weren't using the time card. What you would do in that case is select the school code if you have multiple schools, and then select whatever your pay code is here. You may have a different timekeeping system. You might have something as a manual system or a punch clock system, something like that, and you're not tracking that time in Procare. That's okay. You can still do it right here. You just look at your other system's totals and plug those in right here. So if he had 12, actually this was 40. If he had 40 hours straight time, no overtime, Procare would calculate that here, and you can plug that in there. Then you would move over to the next tab, which is the withholdings tab, and calculate. This is going to look at all of those withholdings that are set up in that employee's withholdings table and come up with the dollar amounts to withhold based on his gross and the amounts in the tax tables, those tax formulas. So it's going to withhold $12 federal, $29.76 Social Security, and this for Medicare. There's the Oregon income, and here's his health plan. Remember that we modified the health plan to be 75 instead of 100. So that's correct. We would look at any credits. If you need to add a credit for some reason, you could add it here. Normally there aren't any credits anymore on paychecks. The advance button. If you needed to add something to an employee, it might be that this person had an extra expense and he's asking you, could you loan me $100 on this paycheck and take it out on the next paycheck? I've had an extra expense. If you wanted to do that, you could just add it in here, right there in the current advance. So we'll do that. And then next button over is reimbursements. This is, again, paying back an employee for something they may have purchased for your school. For example, office supplies or school supplies, diapers, or whatever they might buy. You want to pay them back that amount on this check. You can put that in here. I'm not going to do anything for Greg. I'm just going to look at the last tab here, the summary tab. So here's his gross pay. Here's the withholdings we calculated. There were no credits. He's added $100 on for a current advance. We're adding that to his check. And then we had no repayments of advance checks here, and there were no reimbursements to add on either. So the net check is $433.28. Over on the right, we're going to tell Procare when are we printing this check and what check number is it. So if you're writing checks by hand, you would just want to make sure that the check number here represents the actual check number you wrote by hand. If you're using the printer to print the checks, make sure that your printer is loaded up with checks and that you've got the right check number assigned here for the one that's ready to print in the printer. And if you choose this option, post and print later, the check number and the print date up here are not going to get assigned until you actually print it at a later date. So I'm going to set that aside to do that. I'm going to go ahead and click Post and Print Later for Greg. I did that so you could see what this looks like. Here we go. We have a check number not yet assigned, and we have a check not yet printed. If, let's say we looked at a different employee, so we're just going to exit this person and go to Mary Anderson and issue her a paycheck. Instead of going through the gross pay, withholdings, credits, all of these tabs one at a time, if her time and her time card is correct, the pay rates in her pay rate screen are correct, and all of her withholdings are correct, credits and reimbursements are set, I don't have to do any of that tab by tab thing. I can just click the Quick Calculate button up here at the top. When I click Quick Calculate, it basically does each one of these tabs for me, imports the information from her time card, comes up with her gross pay, executes the Calculate Withholding on the next screen. If there were any credits, it would go ahead and add those in. If there were advances to add in, I could add them here, or if she had something outstanding, she could, that amount would be being repaid back here under advance repayment. Right there. And then again, I could reimburse her for any expenses, and then finally look at the summary. So here I have three options. I have post check, post and print later, or post and print. Post and print will record it in Procare and send it to the printer right now for just this one check, this personal employee check. Post check will just record it in Procare without sending it anywhere, and that's what I would use if you're trying to catch up checks, say from the beginning of the year. If you're just implementing Procare, we're in the middle of August and you want to catch up all of these employee checks from the beginning of the year, you could just record them using post check. If you're recording checks that you've written by hand, but you would still like to give your employee a check stub, then I recommend you use post and print and just print it on plain white paper, cut off the stub, and add it to the handwritten check and hand that to your employees. Okay. I'm still here. Did we lose audio? Okay, good. Okay. I think maybe, Maggie, you got yourself muted, or maybe your computer speakers got muted there by mistake. Great. So I just wanted you to see that there's a couple of ways that you can calculate the check, also different ways to record it in Procare. If you do use our direct deposit feature, which is a downloadable free feature, you would maybe have some bank fees involved by selecting that option to send a file to your bank and have those pay amounts sent directly to your employees' banks. But for Procare's side, there's a free option you can download to do the direct deposit feature. When you use post and print later, it sets that aside as a check that could either be printed or it could be used to calculate that direct deposit file. So I don't have time to go through that, but again, if you wanted to find out a little bit more about the direct deposit, just go to the website with the question mark up here and search on direct deposit, and you'll find the help file there for that. Any questions on how to record a check? Okay, so these post check and post and print record it right now. Post and print later sets it aside to be printed later. Let's look at the one that is set aside for Greg Adams. That's going to be up here in batch print checks because I've set one aside for him. So the very first thing it asks me for at the top here is what check number is it? I could do this one at a time. And if I wrote these by hand, let's say I wanted to record this after the fact, or it might be that when I was doing it in Procare, I clicked the wrong button there. I set this aside as a post and print later, and I didn't mean to. I just wanted to record it. Just come into this screen, put in the right check number at the top, select the person you wrote the check to, and make sure the print date, the date you wrote the check, is correct here, and then just click print if you want to print it. If all you want to do at this point is record it in Procare, you can use this button, complete post check number but do not print. Then just post it, and that will record it in Procare. Okay, so that took care of that. Let's go back to Greg's records here, and we're going to go back to the payroll check calculation screen because I want to show you on this screen. We've now got one check that has been recorded for him. A minute ago, we had this set as no print date and no check number because it was set aside. Then I went to my functions, batch print checks, and went ahead and completed that process. Now I've got an actual check number assigned and a date, but I've also got void check and reprint check available down here. If this check has not been reconciled through our expenses and ledger module, if you're using that, then you have the void check option available. So if I click that, I can choose not only the void date here, but also the reason. It could be that I issued this check twice by mistake, and I just need to void one. So I could call it duplicate and choose whatever date I want. When you void something in Procare, it affects the reports in that the void date is the date that it's coming, quote unquote, off your books. So if you want the reports to be affected on the same day you may have issued that check, or even a charge or credit on a family side of things, you can make the void date equal the original posting date. General accounting principles tell us that the void date should be the date that the error was discovered or that you became aware. So it may be something like an employee comes in 3 days after you issued this check and says, my dog ate my check. Can you give me another check? You could go ahead and void it, but from general accounting principles, you should void it with the date you were told that. That will affect reports. In other words, it will be on the books for those 3 days, and then when you reach the void date in the date range of the reporting, then it will come off the books. So we'll just click that, and that now voids that check. The check now shows pink, so when you look at it in the summary here, when you're going back and reviewing employee checks, you'll see that it's been voided. Okay. Last thing to look at here is our basic payroll reports. So one thing I didn't mention, but if you're using Procare's timekeeping system for your employees, before you start to issue checks, the best thing to do is to come into the employee data module and run your time cards for everybody. The reason you should do this, a couple of things. It verifies their time, but the other reason is it lets you print out a hard copy for them to sign. They basically have a section on this report where they would sign and date that these are indeed the hours that they worked, and that's what they should be being paid for. So you've got then a written record that agrees with what you paid on the paycheck. So that should happen before you even start to issue payroll checks, okay? One of the reports you're probably going to use regularly is going to be the tax summary report, or tax deposit information report, as we call it. This has 940 and 941 information on it, and a couple of other things. So we're going to run this for last pay period. Well, let's just run it for last month. And we've got amounts on this report for our total gross wages versus federal wages. If you had a withholding that was exempt from federal wages, then you'd see a slightly lower amount here because those wages are not included in taxable wages, federal wages. So this is the gross of all paid, and then this is the net that's eligible to be taxed. Same thing with Social Security, Medicare, and any Medicare additional, and then federal unemployment and state unemployment. Total state wages is there, and then any amounts that were payable for SUTA, those are going to be, or included in there rather. These are the amounts that are taxable. And then you've got a summary here of the federal income tax withheld, the employer's share and employees' share of Social Security and Medicare, any additional amounts withheld, and then the 941 tax total. Any advanced earned income credits, normally those are not issued anymore directly on checks. They usually happen at filing status time for an employee. And there's your 941 total right there. And then the 940, this would be your federal unemployment, the employer's share and employee share total there. And then the state, the income tax and the state unemployment. And that's the end of what's included on this report. If you do have other taxes for which you're responsible to make a tax deposit payment, for example, a local county or city tax, something like that, those are not going to show up on this report. What you would do is just take the total at the bottom here and add in whatever those extras are, so you make sure your tax deposit is correct when you send the check in. The other report that will help your accountant, if you need to send this kind of information to your accountant, is what I call the Payroll Journal Summary. This is kind of like our Receivables Journal Summary, and it's from an accounting standpoint at the chart of accounts. So I'm going to run this for the month of July here. And you'll notice that it's basically a balance sheet style report where our debits equal our credits. We've got a debit column here and our credit column there. This is the amount that basically went out of your checking account. This is how much was set aside for liabilities in the liability section. This is the amount that was actual payroll expense to you as a business and the grand total. And then this is the offset to those. Okay, that's the Payroll Journal Summary, and then you can run the Paycheck Summary as well. Let's run that. Yeah, we'll just pick last month again. And there's our checks from last month. So it gives you a nice summary based on the individual checks that were issued to individual people. Also under the company, we've got a couple of different categories of reports here. Company are basically summarized on one sheet or several, summarized sheets. Employee summaries are going to usually come out by employee. So this one, for example, is going to come out by employee. The employee earnings and withholding summary, this gives you an individual sheet for each employee for the period. It gives you all of the detail of all of the withholdings. Let's just run it for the year on this one so you can see what this is. And just you may want to make a note. If you're doing your own W-2s at the end of the year, this is probably the report you would want to print. It will give you an individual sheet for each person to show you all of their individual withholdings for the whole year or whatever period you select. So there we go. There's Mary Anderson right there. And here's her gross earnings for the whole year so far. Here's her gross payroll detail, and then her federal taxes that were paid or withheld, state taxes, liability, and anything else that she paid. So the $300 for childcare shows up there. This is a good report if you need the individual amounts for each withholding for an employee. If you don't need that, if you just need a kind of a generalized on one sheet for everybody, Under the company summary, the simple withholding summary is the other optional report, and this is a little easier to read. It's just this one, this year. Just one person per line. And you'll see their ID number there, the last four of their social, and again, their gross pay, federal, Social Security, Medicare, FUTA, state, and SUTA. And all of the general withholdings, in this case, we happen to know that this is just child care, but it could be both child care and health plan summarized together in this line. So if you needed this broken out, the first report I showed you, which is the earnings and withholding summary, is the one you want for that. And then the rest of these are kind of optional depending on your needs. I recommend on our reports anyway that you just try running them. Select one, go ahead and select a date range and print it. You'll see it on the screen and then you can look at it. If you needed to see a record of any voided paychecks, you can run that. And let's just say for this year, there's the one I voided for Greg, and it would show the post date here and the void date. And again, that affects our reports. So if I ran a report as of 8/2 and I voided this on, say, 8/5, it would be included in my amounts, and on 8/5, it would basically come off of my reports. Same thing with advanced summaries or any of the rest of these. You can run them at your convenience. So that's basic reports. I am open to taking questions if we have some specific questions or scenarios maybe that I didn't cover in our webinar today. For those of you watching the recording of this webinar, I'm going to say thanks for watching, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point.